now. I don't have the
book to
book.
hold up?
Mine doesn't have a cover on it.
Oh.
I have a
I did
cat.
audio, so I can't help it. There you go. Yes. Nicely done, Meryl.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing.
Yes.
Hangouts on Air is going away on August 1st, which is not related to anything that we were going to talk about, but I got a notification on my screen.
Who is?
Well, that's good to know.
Hangouts on Air, like how we've been streaming this for the last X number of years.
Okay, well.
So it made me, we just like do a Google Hangout and we don't broadcast it anymore.
Because who really watches this anyway?
Right.
Sometimes I do.
Okay. When you're there or when you're not there?
When I'm there. Just to see how how stupid I sound.
Okay. Well, you won't be able
Not
to
the whole thing. Never the whole thing. Just like the first 2 seconds.
Oh my gosh. That's like
Okay, that explains some of our analytics.
Okay, well, none of us have a cover to show. But you can at least show what the title page.
Title page.
Hooray! Educated by Tara Westover. All right, what'd you guys think?
Wow.
So wait, Meryl, you had read this before, right?
Yeah, it's been a little while. Yeah.
Okay. So did you not? You didn't reread it this time. Nice.
Hey, there we go.
I did not reread it because I was in grad school, and then I was detoxing from grad school.
Fair enough.
I've not had a minute to stop yet post grad school.
Yeah. What made you want to nominate it, Meryl? And what do you remember about it?
My favorite genre is memoir, and I like memoirs of people who have different lives than I do. So I'm also really into like super religious cults.
Yeah.
And
not
I think
personally, just as an interest.
Yes, as an interest of hobby, not as a lifestyle. Yeah, I think like it's one of my favorite topics to learn about, like how people go to extremes of thought, and I think it's really interesting to talk about too. So, yeah.
Great.
What'd you guys think?
I was a little blown away, I think. So I'm not a big memoir reader. I only read them when somebody says you absolutely need to read this.
Yeah.
Which is actually the same with Michelle Obama's book, which I read like last month. But as somebody who is so entrenched in the educational system, I thought it was really interesting how you can be educated outside of schooling, and the distinction between education and schooling, which I can speak more about later.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts as usual. I do read a lot of memoir, and I also went into this with very high expectations because it had been on like every best of list for 2018, and it has like a 4.8 or something on Goodreads, which is like unheard of. Maybe even higher than that, maybe 4.6. Anyway, so it was like not as good as I maybe went in thinking it might be. It was not bad. Like I'm glad that I read it. I think the thing for me that made it hang together narratively was really her brother and her brother's abuse and the way that her family protected her brother. Once that started, the whole narrative, like then it started.
Oh.
I missed most of that.
Yeah, Jessica paused and cut out.
Oh, wait. Okay. Can you hear me
you're
now?
back. Yeah, you were
Great.
talking about the brother.
Yeah, we just pulled into the garage, and I think I lost service. Okay, I'm going to walk, and then I might be able to switch to my computer when we're inside. So I think that she started out writing it as like the story of her being kept away from school and then what happened when she went to school. And it was so like when she first goes to college, it's a lot of like stories of how ignorant she was of just like the world outside of her family and also like how to do school. But I didn't feel like that was the most compelling part. And that was interesting. But it also felt like a lot of her stories were just kind of shared for shock value or for laughs or like for punchlines more so than like hanging together. Once we started getting into like her brother's control over her life and over other people and how she started like questioning her own view of reality and then her family's reaction to that, her mom going back and forth and her sister going back and forth, like that was a very coherent through line and I really got really into it at that point. But leading up to that, like all the stuff about her dad, I just felt like she was kind of trying to shock the reader. Oh, did I lose it again? Okay.
You said
shock the reader.
Shock the reader.
Yeah. It just be like, oh, this like this crazy thing happened. Like everyone got horribly injured, and then there wasn't really any like story after that. Like she talks about like when she had her tonsils got infected and her dad was like, go stand outside in the sun every day with your mouth open. And so she's like, I did that and it didn't really help. And like, that was the end of the story. And I was like, but that like, then what happened? Like she was like in musical theater. And so it's like, how did she get better again? Like what? It was just like, she was trying to show these like snippets of like, oh my God, isn't my dad crazy? But I didn't really feel like it got really compelling and hung together until that like latter part of the book.
I think it's really interesting. I don't know. I assume Jessica was in this. I'm pretty sure you were too, Eli, when we read The Glass Castle.
Oh, yes. I want to talk about that too.
And like the comparative between the two.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to try to get on my computer here.
I'm pretty sure that was also the three of us and maybe one other person.
Yes. What were your thoughts comparing it to The Glass Castle? Because I think a lot of people have compared it to The Glass Castle.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a similar theme where it's like two women who grew up in radical families in one way or another with siblings. And I guess like, I just think it's interesting in the way it's written that The Glass Castle seemed similar in that it had a lot of snippets of stories. I generally like that. I think that it puts together like kind of a patchwork of a story. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really hard to condense your entire life into one thing. I liked The Glass Castle better than Educated, but I think they were both really good. Yeah, I just think they're very like similarly written and they're similar stories in that like you have these extreme parents who raised relatively societally well-adjusted women who are career women. Did you have specific thoughts about it, Jessica? Or Eli?
Yeah, Eli, why don't you talk if you have any thoughts, because I'm going to try to switch over to my computer now.
You know what? I don't remember. Like, I have a vague recollection of something about a car in The Glass Castle, but I don't actually remember. It's been so long, and I've read a lot of things since then.
It's basically like it was about this woman whose parents were selectively homeless and like reflecting on like house jumping and abuse and neglect. You were in that one because I remember you talking about that specifically, the abuse and neglect bit.
Oh yeah, no. I remember being there, and I know that I own the book, so I've read it because I don't buy things that I don't read anymore. I'm gonna pause for a moment and find my inhaler.
Okay. Good plan. Okay, great. I'm on my computer. I'm not walking around. Don't have to see the car, everything moving around me anymore.
I get to see your game collection. What's
Yes, lots of games.
Do you have Mysterium? Mysterium is my favorite game.
I've never played that.
So good. It's like if an artist and an illustrator reimagined Clue in a more vague way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really
Maybe I'll check that out.
It's a
Mysterium,
kind of a team game.
Okay, Meg knows what it is, but he's never played it.
It has like cards that are basically there's like a ghost, and you're trying to like the ghost is trying to get everyone else in the game to figure out how they died by giving them like really vague cards. So they're like illustrated cards, and you have to like guess the object or the location or the person based on these like cards that are completely different than them.
Interesting.
You should look it up. I think you would like it.
Okay, great. Okay, anyway, back to the book.
Sorry, intermission.
So the thing that I really love The Glass Castle, and the thing that I liked about that was that it, even though it does tell like vignettes, like they have kind of a coherent build, so that you start out thinking like she tells these different stories about her parents, and you think like, oh, they're very like free spirited, they're like artists. And then it's like, as the book progresses and you hear more and more, it's like, you're like, oh, they're actually pretty neglectful. And like, you know, this is actually really scary and terrible. And it's not just like living with hippies. It's like living with people who don't prioritize feeding their children. And that was kind of like the narrative arc of the entire book. Whereas I feel like in Educated, she starts out being like, just throwing at you all of the like worst possible stories, mostly about her dad and how like terrible her dad was. And then it's like, and then it's also a story about her trying to go to school and then going to school and then embarrassing herself because she doesn't know anything about school. And then it's also a story about her brother's abuse and about how that impacted the family and about how that impacted people around the family and how that changed her own view of herself and her memory and things like that. And so I think that all of those pieces were interesting, but I didn't feel like it hung together narratively the way that The Glass Castle did. And that's what I kind of wished from it. So it was very interesting. I enjoyed hearing her story. I particularly was compelled by the like brother's abuse aspect of it, and the way that people protect him, because that I think is more universal than her unique experience living in it wasn't even like a, I mean, he was like, her dad was a religious, but that wasn't really the like foundation of it. Was more of his like bipolar, if that's what he was, that led to them being off the grid and survivalists and not going to school and stuff. So yeah, it was, I mean, I don't like, it wasn't bad, but I don't think it's anywhere near The Glass Castle as far as like writing wise.
I need to remind myself that you write detailed reviews and read them before a book club. So I can think about your like.
No, because then I'll feel like I'm just saying the things that you've already read, and then I won't want to say anything.
No, but then you can elaborate.
Okay.
I am really like, I think it is really interesting because I haven't read any reviews of it. I read it like shortly after it was released. So it's been a while now. I think it's interesting that like it did have so many parallels to The Glass Castle and that you drew the same conclusion, that it's like been compared a lot. But yeah, now that you mention it too, I guess like Educated does go more for shock value than I thought The Glass Castle is, where I think we had more to talk about in The Glass Castle, in that I think some of us were like, no, they were abusive and like this happened and that happened and they were clearly neglectful. But then the other side of us were like, well, they had their own issues too and they weren't meaning to be neglectful. And we had this like kind of debate of what the parents intended and what their, I don't know, like I think it angered a lot of people, but it was also like very informative in the same way of like there are two sides to the story. And yes, like there was neglect, but why was that? And like what was wrong with her parents that it led to that? And you have to see it from like a wider picture. Whereas Educated kind of draws clear lines about like this person was bad, this happened, but doesn't really go into the depths of like what is the backstory of her dad, or like what are the backstories that led them to this. Like there, I mean, there was a brief like talk about their fanaticism and like distancing themselves from families, but there wasn't like a as much, I think, of a build to this is where we were and this is how we are where we are today.
Yes. Two things I thought of while you were talking. Did you want to say something, Eli?
Unrelated, so go.
Okay. One is that one of the other things I liked about the Glass Castle is that I feel like at the beginning when she's younger, we get more of the innocent perspective of like how she just loves her parents because they're her parents and she doesn't know any better. Whereas it was a lot harder to like put myself in that mindset that like Tara Westover tells us like, oh, at the time I thought this was normal, blah, blah, blah. But you don't really like feel that. Like you don't feel her sense of connection with her family necessarily because she's just throwing the wildest stories out. And it's like, she talks a little bit about like making tinctures with her mother or whatever, but you don't get like a feeling necessarily of like, oh, this all felt normal. This felt like this is my family. And that's why it was so hard later on for her to step away from that and make the decision to trust her own memory over what her family was telling her. It's like you never really got that base that I think you get more of in the Glass Castle. The second thing was, one thing that surprised me in her story was how much contact they still had with like her dad's parents, who were pretty normal and her, like clearly did not approve of how the dad was raising them. But the dad also didn't like forbid them from spending time with the grandparents. And so she talks a little bit about like the contrast between how her grandparents lived and how her family lived. But I was just surprised that having spent so much time there, that she didn't feel more conflicted or spend more time talking about like trying to reconcile those worldviews. Or I was surprised that there wasn't a bigger divide between the families given what was going on.
So relatedly, where you ended up, in terms of, and it's all connected. In terms of the writing and the storytelling, it felt like a lot of telling, as opposed to showing, which is, we talk about all the time in like creative writing or whatever. But I think that adds to the disjointedness. It's like, okay, so you're telling us all of these individual stories for shock value or for whatever, and because you're telling them and not showing them, we're having a hard time as readers seeing the connectedness. One of the stories to the bigger picture, and two of what are the main like takeaways? What are we supposed to get from this?
Right.
Yeah, I think the difference maybe, and this is going back to the Glass Castle again, but I think a big difference is that even from the title, I feel like Tara Westover is trying to tell you, I overcame something. Like, this is me prevailing. And like, and I did like the book. Like, I think I rated it really highly on Goodreads. But I think like she's in like an egotistical way in a lot of respects. She's saying, I was able to go to this university and I was able to do this, and I didn't even get educated through a formal way. And like, look at all I've achieved. Whereas I think The Glass Castle was more, this is my life and this is like what you make of it, but this is something I had to tell because I'm trying to work through this myself and I'm trying to reconcile why I am where I am today. Whereas I think Educated is more, look at all I've accomplished despite where I came from.
Right. Right. And that's why I said, like, I don't think it would be as compelling a story without the whole thing about her brother, because like, okay, like you came up in a family where you didn't have formal education. You were able to study on your own and overcome that and go to college, and you had some mishaps, and then you had some like imposter syndrome, and then you were able to keep going from there and get your PhD. And like, that is interesting, but it's not really like, I think if that had been the entire book, I don't know if it would have been a bestseller. If it really was just about like, I overcame my lack of education, which I think is where she started. I think that was her intention. I think I read that about like, that was really, and then she just felt the need to bring in more and more of her family to kind of explain how she ended up not going to school.
Have either of you read Hillbilly Elegy? I think it's like, have you, Eli?
No.
It's a memoir about somebody who grew up in Appalachia and like basically like progressed. I think he may have gone to, I think Harvard too, or an Ivy, and is a lawyer now. And he's reflecting on like, this is where I grew up and I wouldn't have gotten here without like this support, but my parents were never supportive. And like, this is where I came from in a similar fashion, but not like extremist parents, but like in a poverty perspective. And it's gotten some criticism over the fact that like, in some ways he's tokenized, or in some ways he isn't quite speaking the language of where he came from. And he is an exception story because of these certain privileges he had. And he's making it out that like, everyone can get to where I am if you just like really figure out where your privileges are and pull strings to do that. And I really appreciated the story because I had worked there for a while, but like in a lot of sense, like it's like looking from the outside in. And I think in the same way, Tara Westover like name drops kind of the colleges that she went to and the education that she has now. And I think like it's a similar feel in some ways, and that she's like, this is where I came from. Look at me. I made it to society's expectations of what the highest education is. And then talks about like Harvard and Cambridge. And these are like these big names. Whereas she doesn't talk as much about like her accomplishments and how they were influenced by her past, but more like, look at these accomplishments I have because of my past. And now I'm telling my story. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
yeah, she mentions very briefly doing like that. She did a really interesting thesis or research paper that involved Mormonism. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. She's like transforming her background into something more scholarly. And then that was it. Like, we don't hear about it really again, which was unfortunate. Cause like you said, it was like, basically her message was like, she accomplished all this in spite of everything that she came through, and that nothing that happened to her in her whole life had any value. Essentially, this formal education at the most prestigious universities was the overcoming of having grown up the way she did.
I think there's also, I mean, she touched on it briefly, and correct me if I'm wrong because it has been a while, but I just think it's so easy to talk about it in relation to the Glass Castle. But like there isn't also a lot of reflection on like the continued struggle of reckoning with your past. Like I think Jeanette Walls does a better job of being like, and I still see my mom and I still see my dad, and like this is how they're living now, and I disagree with it, but I still love them, and like that kind of disjointed relationship. I don't think that was explored as much in Educated.
Well, she kind of got cut off from her family. I mean, her
Yeah.
family basically split. She didn't really have a choice in the matter.
But not even that, but like in I feel like Jeanette Walls was like often tried to justify from her parents' perspective her childhood. Whereas
Yes,
Sarah Westover does more of a this is wrong and this is what society says, and now I'm here and I can see all of this, and I didn't know better as a child, but now I know this. Instead of saying, okay, different people live different lives, and this is maybe what my parents were thinking. They were trying to do the best for me, or, you know, and I think there was a lot of that. Even in her stories, it was like her parents were trying to do what they thought was best.
Yeah.
And it wasn't framed ever in that way. It wasn't, I mean, maybe sometimes with her mom, I think it was, but less so with her dad, where it was just like, this is why he was terrible, and this is why I had to go along with it. But again, it's been a while, so. Eli?
No, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking about cognitive dissonance. And I'm thinking about how I think so. And so I'm pulling things out of all of the work that I've been doing this month around like culturally and linguistically responsive teaching.
Oh, we're talking about that a lot at my organization right now. Go ahead.
Yeah.
We can talk about it later.
Okay. So and where was I going? Oh, so cognitive dissonance. Because of that work and that work I've been doing with the teachers that I'm working with, I think it would have been a lot more interesting to see or to understand more of those processes as she worked through the places where she had cognitive dissonance. So moving from home self-education or self-learning to the institution of school, or from expectations of women as Mormon women in their household to whatever else is going on in society that she learns like once she leaves. And so when I think about what educated means, and I think about what being educated means outside of the institution of school, I think that's where it would have been more interesting for me and more connected to the title.
Yeah. Yeah. She tries to bring it back at the very end by basically saying like the growth that she experienced from having to deal with all this was for her an education, in contrast to like her formal education. But it other than that, I had a hard time until she tied it at the very, very end. I had a hard time seeing why that was for her the most important thing to. I know authors don't always pick their own titles, but as John Green has told us.
So I'm looking very strangely, if you were wondering, because there's a huge storm that just started out my window.
Oh no.
And the trees were like that. But anyway, I had a thought. Oh, I lost it. Oh, Eli, I'm wondering like what your response would be if somebody like Tara Westover ended up in your classroom as a teacher.
We've actually had a number of students who came to us from, and then they're being homeschooled with varying degrees of success. And because I taught reading, I typically got like the kids who didn't read very well, even some of the homeschooled ones. And it's all, although there were some kids who were homeschooled and they came to us and they were like, on the other end.
Yeah.
It'd be for me, it'd be, let me find out about this kid. Where does this kid come from? Let me make sure that, I validate and affirm their lived experiences and then try to build on those, or try to help them learn the behaviors and whatnot that are school specific and specific to school culture, while not negating the cultures that they come from to begin with.
I guess it's a big question about homeschool in general. Like, there are a lot of issues with the school system, but there are a lot of issues with not following those as well. And like the debate between, like, are we educating our kids in the right way? And like, how is the school system actually suppressing a lot of that individual learning? And how, yeah, I think that's an interesting conversation as well, because there are so many levels of homeschooling, like you said, where some of the parents do really well at doing it, and then others pick and choose, I think, what topics they want to focus on and then neglect others or subjects rather.
I have to say that I am incredibly impressed that she taught herself a bunch of things. I don't want to gloss over that point, because I think I can't even imagine trying to teach myself algebra.
Yeah, the math was particularly interesting. I don't remember much about that part of the story, but that like sticks out in my head when she was talking about math. I was like, I couldn't even get that in a classroom.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and I wonder if we are supposed to walk away thinking that she was the exception, or that she was extraordinary, or that anybody could do it, like you were saying, Meryl, that anybody could do this if they wanted to. Because I kind of feel like she and her brother, out of the whole family, seemed naturally inclined that way, seemed naturally talented that way. I don't know that you could say like any of her brothers could have done the same thing if they had just applied themselves. Like, I don't think that that's fair to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
go ahead.
So one of the things we've been talking about at the organization I work is about the research around teaching reading, and how like so many schools are still doing, even though the research points very strongly to doing basically like phonics over sight reading, or whatever you want to call it, whole words. I can't remember what it's called. A lot of schools are still doing that, or doing balanced literacy, which is like both, even though like we know that the research is towards phonics. And so it's saying like a lot of kids need to be taught the right way, and they need to be taught with this structure that we know works. But the part of the reason that is not implemented everywhere is because there is a small portion of students who will learn to read regardless of how they are taught. And the problem is that we look at them and say, well, this kid taught herself to read when she was 4, so it can't be that hard. Like, it kind of doesn't matter how we teach reading, because kids are going to pick it up eventually, and this is not true. And that's one of the things we're running into with one of the projects that I'm working on, is that they don't do literacy testing after elementary school, because it's just assumed that at that point everyone is fluent, which is not true.
Right.
Yeah.
So
why I had a job.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I do wish. I mean, I guess it's hard because like how could she really have gotten into that without like tooting her own horn and being like, I am special, I am smarter than most people. But I also don't know if people can walk away thinking that she's saying like, I just tried the hardest, and so therefore that's the reason I got out and no one else did.
Well, didn't most of her brothers, like two of the older ones, left, and they were like driving rigs or whatever, and then the one brother, I noticed, like he left and then ended up doing his PhD at Purdue. Go Boilers.
Right. Tyler got out first and was the one who like encouraged her, and then Richard, I think, is the name she gave for her younger brother, who also was like more interested in books, and he ended up, and that was kind of where you have the split in the family. But the older ones like left, but then ended up coming back, a lot of them, and working in the junkyard.
And I think that she maybe what was it? Why am I hearing myself reflected? I'm weird. That's weird. Hold on, let me go ahead with this. Something about well, she talks about her struggle, you know, especially with the math.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe as a way of suggesting that, you know, it wasn't easy, but like I persevered and then made it out. I'm not just like special snowflake.
Well, but that I think is the
I think that worked.
potential issue, is that in framing it that way, it's almost like saying like anyone can teach themselves trigonometry if they just spend enough time with it, which I don't think is true. So yeah, maybe she was trying to be humbler by showing her struggles, but I just worry that people could take away from that, like, if you just spend enough hours with a textbook, like, you will eventually learn anything that you want to possibly learn, which I don't think is necessarily true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at the discussion questions. There's some discussion questions.
Oh yeah, I forgot
really,
that that's
like,
a thing.
like,
Maybe we should talk about those.
no, I'm looking at them. And
we get to make the rules.
We've covered like most of the ones that I think are interesting. So,
okay.
Another part of it that was like more minor, but I know it got touched on at least like enough significantly, is medicine.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. I know, Jessica, you said about the tonsils.
Yeah, well, just in general, like I was kind of flabbergasted that like her family survived so much, like horrific accidents, illnesses, like with nothing but this like homeopathic stuff that her mother concocted by muscle testing what should be in it. And like there really didn't seem to be, I mean, people had scars, her mother had some like brain damage, but there didn't seem to be like a whole lot of long-term physical damage from all of like many, I mean, including to herself, where she like fell off that like metal I can't remember what it's called, but just in the car accidents that they were in, and just like she never really she talks a little bit about how she realizes that that wasn't really like sufficient, what her mother was doing, when she learns about like actually taking real medicine and how it makes a difference, where her mother's like pain meds never actually took away any pain. But she never really explains like, how does she explain how they healed from all of these things, if she's now saying like, does she believe that there was an element of faith in it, or that there was some like validity to some of what her mother was doing, just not maybe all the way? Or was it luck? Like I don't know how to explain it myself, and I would be particularly interested to know how she explains that to herself.
Like the brother, whoever, who got his arm stuck in the thing.
Oh my gosh. I blocked that out.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's
no,
fine.
I was like I was particularly, it's like, okay, so he comes in and there's like blood is dripping off of his, what happens?
Right, like the bone is showing, and then it's just like, we hear much later, like, oh yeah, and then he had a scar, and it's like, well, how did that all heal? Like what? Like just given enough bed rest, like any injury will just heal itself.
Herbs sleep in the sun.
Right, that was their only, like, yeah, exactly. Herbs, sleep, and sun were the only medications they ever got.
Does she talk at all about her religion today?
No, because I was listening for that.
That would be really interesting to hear more about, because she went to Brigham Young as well, and I think that would just be really interesting to go from that environment to Harvard and Cambridge.
Right. I mean, she talks
One of those
about
thoughts with cognitive dissonance.
and she talks about the like
Yeah.
approaching Mormonism from a more scholarly historical perspective, but she doesn't say whether in breaking away from her family and doing all this other formal education, if she left the more like mainstream Latter-day Saints church, or is not Christian at all anymore, is not religious at all anymore. I don't know.
Because that seems like a very large gap if you're basing a lot of the book on education and then, or not on education, on religion, and the reasonings behind their beliefs were largely religion.
Kind of. I mean, she says at the very beginning in her author's note, like some of the people in this book are religious, some are not. Don't draw any parallels about what people did related to religion. And a lot of what her father did was not only was it not related to mainstream Mormonism, it wasn't even really fundamental Latter-day Saints. It was just like his own personal bipolar survivalist theology.
Yeah, I mean, not even relating it to Mormonism though, but like underlying that there was some religious belief. Not saying like this is Mormonism, because I think she was trying to like not draw parallels between Mormonism specifically or like target a specific religion, but I still think religion had a huge impact on why the family separated from the rest of the family and like how they got to where they were, even if eventually it was also more maybe mental illness. But I think it did talk about the fact that like this was a religious decision too, even if it's, I don't know.
How did you feel like their religion played into their decision to believe her brother over her, other than just general like patriarchy in religion?
I mean, I think it was the like doomsday type stuff. But maybe I'm just remembering it incorrectly.
I might. Good.
How is the doomsday connected to, like why they believe what is his name, Sean, over Angie? And I'm not seeing the parallel, or it's not seeing the connection.
I don't know. Been too long.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily religion related in the end.
I don't think so in the end. I was talking about the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I took it as denial.
Well, you're right. A lot of what led up to that was a basically like very, very extreme I can't think of words today. An extreme version of purity culture, essentially. Like that was what prompted a lot of Sean's outrages, was like, I'm trying to protect your purity, you're dressing like a slut. And that was like how she had identified for a very long time, but then she talks about how like there is nothing that she could do as a woman. There is no way she could exist in space in a way that could not be interpreted as immoral. Which I think is a very important conversation. And that definitely does tie very strongly into religion.
I also think it's interesting that it starts with those anecdotes and then doesn't really address them as much in the end. Because when I was saying that, I was only talking about the very beginning. And I think my point was that like toward the end of the book, it doesn't really talk about religion almost at all.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I could be remembering it wrong.
Well, other than her parents, like basically saying she had sold herself to the devil, like being part of this secular religious or educational institution, and the way she was living, like she was like the devil had a hold on her, and unless she relinquished that, she was choosing the devil, and that was why they had to disown her. So it was definitely couched in religious terms, if nothing else. But I don't know if religion was like the reason behind them and ultimately not believing her.
I mean, I guess religion is also often associated too more with a group, whereas her family, I guess it was more their faith than their religion.
Yeah, and it was a very twisted kind of. Okay, what were you gonna say, Ellie?
Didn't they also attend? Well, and this is. Didn't they attend church too? Because the singing thing happened in church.
Yeah, they attended church, and then her father every time would rail about how everyone there was a Gentile and everyone there was living in sin for one reason or another. That was everyone at their church. Yeah, I think different people have different answers to this question, but I don't know how you walk away from from a life that is so far outside the mainstream, that is so closely tied to religion, and break away from that without breaking away from religion. I think for some people, their faith is so core to who they are that even if what it looks like ends up looking different, like that's something they can never let go of. And for other people, it's like if they walk away from that life that they recognize to be neglectful or abusive or just not based in reality, then they have to cut their beliefs entirely away from that. And I don't know where she ended up herself, but I definitely have seen people do both of those things. And I don't know which is more common.
I'd be interested to see. There were a couple of videos when I was looking for discussion questions. There were a couple of videos that came up that I didn't watch about like her answering people's questions about the memoir. So I think I will probably, when we're finished, take a look at some of those and see if some of our questions are answered.
Yeah. I read a couple of articles. I read at least one interview with her, but she didn't talk about that at all. She just kind of told the same stories about like why she decided to write the book and what her relationship with her family ended up being.
I watched a few of those interviews, and it was early on, so maybe she's done more, but I remember having a similar feeling where, like, I thought she was just kind of recapping so people would read the book, maybe, where, like, it was kind of more of a, to find out more, read the book.
Yeah. And then I also stumbled on this article that was, like, excoriating her for writing the book, because it was basically, like, what was the point of this other than to, like, dishonor your parents by talking about them?
I mean, I'm sure she had other motives than that. Like,
right.
One of the discussion questions I read was like, what does it mean when she wrote this book at age, I think she's 30 or early 30s, when she's still like reckoning with her life, and like, how would this be different if she wrote it at age 60 or, a different age where she had more time to process it? Because the feeling that I get from the book is that a lot of the book was written when she was trying to process it herself. And so, like, given more time, would it be different?
Yeah, there was. I went back to listen to the beginning of the book to get the list of pseudonyms after I had finished it, and then I re-listened to the two epigraphs. So the one, let's see, or maybe there's just one, the Virginia Woolf. The past is beautiful because one never realizes an emotion at the time. It expands later, and thus we don't have complete emotions about the present, only the past. Which is interesting because I think what you're saying is that she's not even far enough from that past to really know all of her feelings about it and how that's impacted who she is today, because she's still living in today.
Yeah.
I gotta get going here in a couple minutes. What just happened?
Meryl.
Just the silence. It's just the silence. It's like, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the face that she made in reaction to the silence.
Okay, I was looking at these discussion questions. Okay, anything else before we wrap up?
What's the next book?
So we've got 3 choices, as we usually do. Our 3 choices are. Oh, wait, no, that's not the right sticky. Hold on. This is the right sticky. Sea of Tranquility, Untamed
That was there for a while.
Yeah, and I
what was the second one?
An Untamed State, Roxane Gay. I think that was Pam.
Oh yeah.
And then the third one is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, which was me.
Okay. Sea of Tranquility must have been mine because that's one of my very favorite books.
Did you just put all of your very favorite books on the list?
The ones that I thought would be good for discussion.
Every time yours come up.
I mean, I usually like most of Jessica's books, so I'm not complaining.
Okay, well, Meryl, you're the only one who didn't nominate a book that's in the choices, so
I defer to Pam.
What? We gotta vote now.
I don't want to be the decision maker. Wait, okay, tell me them again. Look them.
The Sea of Tranquility, An Untamed State, and Eleanor Oliphant.
Have you read that book, Eli?
You know what? I did audio for the beginning, and I was really intrigued, and then I fell asleep.
It's also going to be a movie too, isn't it?
Is it? I don't know. I know that Where'd You Go, Bernadette is going to be a movie. And I want to read that.
I think it's in process to become some media, either like a miniseries or a movie. I don't know anything about Sea of Tranquility. You want to make your case, Jessica? Wait, here's my question: are any of them magical real?
It's about.
No, none of them are. I mean, unless Untamed State is, because you know she would put a magical realism on. Eleanor Oliphant's not magical realism.
I hate magical realism.
Oh my gosh, there's nothing wrong with magical realism.
I haven't liked.
I don't like it either.
I haven't liked any book that I've read that has magical realism. I blame.
Let me see if the Untamed State does not have magical realism as one of its categories on Goodreads, so I would guess not. That one is on my to read list, so I would not be opposed to. Actually, I would not be opposed to reading any of them, honestly.
I know they all sound.
Because I also want to read Eleanor Oliphant.
I'm still looking them up.
Decide, Meryl, decide.
Okay. The Sea of Tranquility and Eleanor Oliphant both have 4.32 on Goodreads. They are exactly tied as very good books.
So basically, I'm decided between those two. Is that where we're at? Because otherwise, we're tied. A 3 tie.
Are you advocating for Eleanor Oliphant this time, Eli?
Yeah, I am because I want to read that. I mean, I guess I could read it anyway. But... What?
No, I'm eventually gonna read it anyway. Also, so if you guys want to do that this time.
I vote Eleanor Oliphant.
All right, Eleanor Oliphant it is. Yay!
All right, let's do it. Let's see what the whole list is like.
Huh?
Yes.
That one may have a longer line at the library as well, though. It's pretty popular. I know this because sometimes I look at what people are reading on the subway. Lately, it's been that one, Kristen Hanna books, and Michelle Obama's book. Those are the most common ones.
Oh yeah. I got on an airplane last weekend, and it was like the front row, someone was reading The Great Alone, and then the next row over, like back one, someone was reading The Nightingale. It's just like Kristen Hanna across the front of the plane.
Did either of you read The Great Alone?
No, I don't even know who that is.
It was really depressing, but I read it in like 2 days. It was so good.
I'm afraid to pick it up because I've heard that it's so depressing and like dark and
It is.
But But then I guess you could say the same thing about The Nightingale.
I think you would like it. I think you would actually think it was overrated, but I think you would enjoy it.
Okay,
I
so
think
Eleanor
I
Oliphant.
would probably hate it, and I think you would like it.
Okay, Eleanor Oliphant still has it was published in 2017, and it still has a pretty long line at the library. I don't know about you guys if you want to check before we lock it
Eli
in.
and I with our like 14 different libraries.
Great. I own the audiobook already, so.
I mean, I have Audible credits.
Well, there you go. So
I would probably,
Meryl.
I have 4 Audible credits right now, so I'd probably do that.
Okay.
But we have 2 months. Do you think you could
Okie
get
doke
it?
then.
Do you think you could get it in 2 months?
Well, let's right now the estimate on the holds is 10 weeks. So that is more than 2 months. Sometimes it goes faster than that.
Do you have access to the university libraries?
Yeah, the only thing is like I can get through our local library or through university library, I can get hard copies of books, but like I never have time to read hard copies anymore. So I have to do audio or sometimes Kindle, and both of those are 10 weeks out at the library. So
if you
I'll figure it out.
Well, I could send it to you as your one book I can send.
I don't. I get everything from the library.
To help you.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I feel like audiobooks actually go faster though, because people go through them faster.
We'll see.
Well, no, that wouldn't work. Never mind.
It's fine. I'll figure it out. I gotta get going.
Okay. Have fun.
I'm just gonna put it
on your boat.
Thanks. Yep. See you guys in August.
Yep.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Do, 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 do.